So I want to actually talk about your upbringing. I know you grew up in Dublin in a very entrepreneurial family. You had a family business, and I'm always so curious. How do you think that really shaped the woman you are today and the way you approach making decisions and taking risks?
So it was actually, I always dreamed of growing up in Dublin. It was actually the west of Ireland, which is very rural. So, like, you got Dublin over here on this side, and we are on the complete opposite side. Uh, as many Americans would describe as really the middle of nowhere, which was gorgeous and beautiful. And for about 2 weeks of the year, it is the most gorgeous place in the world to grow up.
2 weeks.
It's stunning. I mean, the weather is fab. So what was it like growing up there? I mean, yeah, it being an entrepreneurial family from the very beginning, and I think through every dinner table conversation, even through the way that we would have taken on hobbies or sports, everything had some level of lesson, like entrepreneurial teaching in it. And I don't know if I fully grasped that growing up. And now I look back at all of the small nudges or things that my father would have said, at the dinner table, going, that's what he meant. Um, but no, I think anyone growing up in an entrepreneurial family, it's baked into your DNA from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's true.
So yeah, I think there was an element of wanting to start a business or knowing I would start a business that always was baked into my belief very early on.
Yeah, and we'll go into your story in a bit, but what I love about that is you didn't necessarily jump into your business early on. You had many experiences working for different people. And I just want to share that because, some people might be listening in and they're like, God, I just want to start that business too. I feel what she's saying, but sometimes it takes life and different circumstances to get you to where you are. So we'll get into your story in a bit, but I understand that after college, you actually worked in your family business for a little bit. I worked with my father for 2 years and that was a very interesting experience. So I'm just curious, what would you say were maybe some of the biggest learnings there and what really pushed you to go down a different route because your career kind of made a left turn after that?
Yeah, it really did. Well, look, I think with a generational family business, there's always a hope that it continues to stay in the family. You always want it to be, in that tight knit generational passed on. The succession basically has to continue. But there's always a hope that the next generation will go out and get more experience. So yes, for a short moment, I was in the family business, and then I quickly came to learn that I needed more skills. Adding to the family business and helping it grow would come from me having experience elsewhere. So my dad was very good at pushing us to say, go out into the world, go learn something and then come back. And I suppose, yes, I always thought I would join another company, give it 2 to 3 years and then make my way back home. And I never did.
You went far away.
Far away. I mean, I left the country and just never returned.
Yes. And let's talk about that because I know I'm fast forwarding a bit, but you ended up working at Google, which is a great job. I believe that was in Dublin, right? Was that
I was
job
in
or
Dublin for a minute and then it was
okay.
out to Mountain View.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. Cause that was my question. What really shifted you to move across different countries, make a massive risk? I'm curious to get what your family was thinking. Like you're leaving that far, but tell me more about what motivated you to move to Silicon Valley. Because again, that was that very much opened your mind to just so much more opportunities.
It did. I mean, look, getting an offer from Google was a pinch me moment. It was such a big deal. And to be able to come do that at their headquarters in California again for an Irish girl, it was a dream. And my parents extremely supportive of it. I think again with the mindset of go to America, go to California, you'll get all the experience you need and you'll come home. And as soon as I landed in what was Silicon Valley, the bug the
Mm.
bug of disruption and that real entrepreneurial energy, it was incredible. And I think very early on being there, I couldn't see myself leaving. So there was huge support. It was a risk, but it was also a huge honor, I think, in many ways.
Yeah. And, like you said, being at the headquarters, working at such a reputable company like Google, nobody wants to leave that, right? The stability, the, well-known aspect of the company, the financial stability, but you decided to leave that as well and take another bet. So I'm curious, maybe you can walk us through why you decided to leave and how you came across this quote unquote very small startup at the time. And there were so many learnings that came from that.
This is a funny story, actually. So I used to always have to go to New York for work with Google. And there was one particular trip, the costs of hotels were through the roof. They were far exceeding the budget that Google had set. And I had a colleague turn to me and said, well, why don't you just book an air bed and breakfast when you go there? And I remember being totally taken back, being like, what are you talking about? Going onto the website and finding a gorgeous 2-bed apartment in Soho where I got to work from for a week, going in and out of the Google offices. And while I was there, every single evening I came back to that apartment and like, this is genius, genius. I am living in New York City. I'm living that life within a certain and decent budget to be able to be here. I'm cooking my own dinners at night. And it just, I mean, it triggered everything, the disruption of hospitality in a way that it never had been, community in a completely different way of thinking. And I left that trip and I was like, I have to work for this company. I have to work for Air Bed and Breakfast. And I reached out to one of the founders and said, I will take whatever job it takes. I must work for you. And, several months later, I was there.
That is so amazing. I mean, for people who don't know, that ended up being Airbnb, but now it's such a normal experience. But to think how that was, you were so early and you were in Soho and you're like, this does not exist. I'm sure your mind was blown. And I'm curious, in moments like that, were you looking to leave Google? Like, was your mind primed in, let me find the next thing? Or was this just, you fell in love with the idea and you were like, no, this is it. Like, I need to work for them.
Yeah,
What was
no,
your mindset?
wasn't thinking of leaving at all. I mean, you said it perfectly. Everything was there for me. It was a dream job. It had all the perks and benefits. It was regarded as an incredible company by everyone. My resume was getting built. And I remember even calling home and telling my parents I was thinking of leaving Google to join this small little startup that at the time actually was in the news for just going through its own issues. And my dad was very taken back. He was like, hold on a second. You're telling me that you're going to leave Google to start a B&B. It's like, no, that is not what I'm doing. Having to explain the business model and what this product was and why I believe it would be game changing. And then, it wasn't even shortly long after that, maybe fast forward a year, I remember everyone and their grandmother back in the west of Ireland had all heard of Airbnb. Um, but no, it was a risk at the time. You're totally right. Huge jump.
Yeah. And in another interview, you wrote, if you want to work in tech, you have to get comfortable taking risks and betting on yourself. And I feel like you have naturally done that even at a young age. And, how did you have the confidence to bet on yourself? Because I'm sure a lot of people might want to take that risk or join a startup, but they're like, well, I don't know. I've never been in a small startup. What can I bring to the table? But you didn't have that mentality. So how did you really learn to build that confidence and to really bet on yourself?
You opened this up talking about growing up in an entrepreneurial family. And like I said, I think it was in many ways baked into everything we were taught at a young age. And I give a lot of credit to my father in this way. Um, Betting on yourself was a way that we grew up. And it was always told to us that it was the one thing you had full control over, how you want to show up, where you want to put your energy, how you want to handle failure, how you want to be able to pick yourself back up. Betting on yourself, while it may seem like the biggest risk, is actually one of the safest bets you can make. And I don't see it as a scary thing, maybe because of that, because it is the one thing we have full control over. Yeah, I've never been asked that question in that way, but yeah, I think in many ways I just don't see it as a scary thing.
I love that. And I think that's so powerful what you said. You said it's one of the safest things. And just to reiterate, is it from your perspective, betting on yourself because you are in full control of your life and the experiences and you leave whatever that situation with some kind of knowledge that you take to something else? Like, is that what you mean by when you say the safety? I love that because people don't think like that. That's a different mindset, and so much beauty and changing the world, which you have, comes from taking risks like that, even before you started your company, right? So if someone can do that even in their life today, before you disrupt the world in any way you want, like that is such a good muscle and mindset to work. So I love that. I'm so inspired. So let's talk about Airbnb. You were there, like you said, when it was early. A year later, really continued to gained traction. You said people back home knew about it. It was still all over the press, but it wasn't to the extent it is today. And I feel like I have so many questions, but maybe one, this is selfishly, I'm a big fan of Brian Chesky. I respect him so much. So I'm sure you have so many maybe lessons or anything you've learned maybe from him or the business, but what are some things that stand out from your experience being on this incredible rocket ship with such an incredible leader?
Oh my God. I could spend the entire hour
I
talking
know, I
about
know.
what I have consumed. And very few people get the honor to work alongside like true genius in every entrepreneurial way. My biggest lesson, if I had to like synthesize it into one, would be the real appetite and aperture to learn and to keep looking at every single day, every single year that you go into your business. And instead of looking back and going, wow, I've come so far, Brian walked into every single year with this energy of, I'm going to learn double, triple to what I did the year before. And I actually think that was watching that, especially in comparison to other leaders who almost see that the further they go, the less they need to continue learning. Um, and it is now that I'm in seat as a founder CEO, I see the criticalness of making sure that you continue learning.
And being excited about that, because it could feel very daunting. And I'm only 3 years in my business, and every year you're a different person. You have, from even 3 years in, I'm learning. I have to shift. I have to learn. You're much, many more years down the line compared to me. But what I thought was so interesting that you said is also like being excited about it, because it could be fearful. You're like, okay, we hit our goals, but what's next? Like, what are we going to do? Or, what do I need to learn? What do we need to pivot? And you could easily be scared about making those decisions and changes. And as your company gets bigger, I'm sure there's even more responsibility. But I
So
love the
true.
excitement piece.
Yeah, and also just like
There.
again, it just exactly being excited to learn something new, knowing you can have an impact with that learning. Yeah, you're totally right. Change your mindset. Um, I'll never forget just even a moment at Airbnb where it was pretty early on. Brian came into the room and he said, I'm really excited to share with you all that we're going to hire a new GC, not a new one. We're going to hire a GC, which is essentially a general counsel for the company. And everyone was like, okay, that's great. And Brian goes, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what that is. So, and he read out the definition. I remember sitting there going, wow, he is just learning about what this role is to have a general counsel. He didn't know, and he was open to sharing with the whole company that vulnerability of not knowing what the role was. That like left a really big impact for me, that it doesn't matter how big you are or the role that you play. You can be vulnerable enough to share what you don't know. Um, yeah, I'll never forget it.
I love that. And he has no problem asking the basic questions to learn and being, that is super interesting. I love that, because I'm sure as your business grows, you're always like, people expect me to have all the answers, but you're figuring it out as you go as well. So that I love the vulnerability and, like first principles thinking of just like, what is this? Breaking it down, asking the right questions. So that's amazing. So, you were there for quite a bit of time, about 6 years, and were like really hands-on with the operations. Tell me more about how having your first baby really shifted. Actually, let me rephrase that. Was a turning point for your career? Because I know you loved Airbnb. You loved what you were doing. You always saw yourself as a career woman. So I would love to just get in your mind to see, how did that shift you as a person and become a turning point?
I always knew I wanted to be a mother, but I actually think it was the one part of my life I knew I wanted to do, but I really hadn't taken the time to understand, well, what does that actually mean? And if you think about it, for most women, especially of our generation, you grow up and you are told, whether it's by your parents or anyone around you, you can be the best in your job, you can be the best in your career, you can climb the ladder, you can be better than any guy out there. And very rarely was our generation of women sat down and told, and you're going to be a great mom. And by the
It's so
way,
interesting. You're right.
you're not, and maybe generations before us, it was in some ways baked into the expectation that almost motherhood comes first and your career will come second. Our generation, it flipped. And because it flipped, I also think for our own parents and society around us, there was this desire to push young girls, And it was a good thing. Push young girls to make sure they went to college, that when they graduated, they got the best job, that they fought for the best salaries. And now, as I look back, in all of that beautiful push, I don't know if I ever gave as much attention or got as much attention around what it meant to also be a great mother and what that would mean. So I say all of that in a place of vulnerability, because when I did become a mother, I think the shock of not fully understanding what that meant to introduce this into my life, around how expectations didn't match reality, it was an identity crisis. It was a massive identity crisis. And I feel comfortable sharing that today. But at the time, in an identity crisis, you're hiding away from it. You don't know how to talk to other people about it. You're still trying to show up as a career woman, but you have this beautiful, precious human at home that you are totally responsible for. So now I've lost track on even the question that you've asked.
No, you answered the question.
It was an identity crisis. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I feel like we can probably do another podcast around this, but you're so right. I feel like similar to my life, from my dad's perspective, who's also very entrepreneurial, it was like, go make money, be an independent woman, don't rely on anyone. And it's like, I did that. Check, 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 but then I have my husband, we don't have kids yet, but then it was interesting how it quickly shifted to like, oh, when are you guys going to have kids? And I'm like, it's just interesting. I'm like, oh, dad, that, we want a family one day for sure. But it's so interesting to see how there was not one conversation about children with any one of my parents ever, which, maybe is a good thing. I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, but I was like, interesting. I get married. I'm a little bit, in my 30s. And it's like, you went from kill it in life and business and do everything to like, so I'm waiting. When are you going to have kids? So it's super interesting to see that. And
just exactly what you just said. I'll never forget having my first daughter, Mary. And I don't know whether it was like during maternity leave and my parents were there. And I remember being taken back with that exact same thing when my father, who had pushed me in all of these other ways in life, turned around and said, she is going to be the most important thing in your life. You make sure you
like,
take
how interesting.
all of the time off you need to, and you put her first. I was like, that's right. But why is this the first time I am considering how much of a shift that is, given all of the things that I've worked towards to get to this point?
Yes, it's so interesting. And, selfishly with this podcast, it was, I've always been also fascinated, outside of just business, but how do you show up as your full self as an entrepreneur and to be a happy wife and have a happy marriage and be involved with your kids? Like, I didn't know what that looked like. So I feel like having these conversations and also looks very different for everyone. But I think it's something that, we need to continue to talk about because, it's just I feel like that could be a whole nother podcast, but that is so interesting about your father. That definitely is very, very relatable. And, also outside of it, shifting your identity, having your first child, you also, maybe let me take a step back. Like, tell me more about your feeding journey, because that was also a big learning curve for you too.
Huge. Okay. Here I am, Irish Catholic woman. My grandmother, she breastfed 13 children.
I can't believe it. 13.
Just 13 kids. And you obviously add your own arms and legs and you assume that the skies opened up and she was able to do it beautifully, and just it all worked perfectly for every other woman before me. And you don't ever think twice, ever. So then I go into it and I'm like, oh, have a child. Child came out easy. This is great. And plop her onto my boob, thinking it's all going to work easy. And I started having some issues. And it led to what is a very, very common infection called mastitis. And any mother listening to this who's gone through that is probably shuddering and thinking about the pain and the bruises and the blood, and it's not friendly at all. Unfortunately, when you get it, it can also cause blocked ducts and lead you to not being able to breastfeed in that moment. The emotional journey that a woman will go on when they hit that exact moment when they realize, I was told that this was the best way to feed my baby. I expected that my body would be able to do it. And now I am left with a hungry baby and I am not able to feed her. It is gut-wrenching. Gut-wrenching. And in that moment, you are left in many ways alone because this is not an open conversation that people know how to have or even know where to go to have. So they're left somewhat on their own in the middle of the night, searching on Google, trying to figure out how they clear both their infection and feed their baby. For me, it was being in a pharmacy, trying to find an alternative to feed her, which was formula. And up until that point, even the thought of formula hadn't even crossed my mind. The idea that I wouldn't be able to breastfeed I didn't prepare for. So I knew I had to feed her, and I'm standing there trying to choose a product. I have a fever, I'm exhausted, baby is hungry and tired, and I'm also embarrassed. And I remember just being in that moment going, I don't even know which one to buy. And why does it feel like a medical solution? Like, truly, why does it feel like I am buying a medical alternative for being unable to feed her myself? And it has been that emotional guilt. And I keep using the word guilt, which is just, it's only internal guilt, right? Because you put it on yourself, especially when you hold yourself to a high bar. I spent 10 months being extremely healthy through pregnancy so that when she came out, she was the best she could be. And here I am looking at a product and the first ingredient is corn syrup. I'm like, this is crazy. Why would I do this? So my feeding journey took a bit of a mini research path for me. And I questioned everything, everything. But to kind of put a bow on that particular journey, I did introduce formula. I actually did get my supply back, and I ended up combo feeding her with formula and being able to continue to pump and use some breast milk for the next several months. But yeah, that was one journey of four, which are all very different.
I feel like every pregnancy, I don't have any kids, but just from my friends and people I talk to, I feel like every pregnancy, every child, like every situation a woman goes through is so different. And you said something so interesting earlier in your journey of like, you think it's only you. You're like like you were talking about your grandmother, right? It could be, you're like every other woman can breastfeed, or, if you're going on a fertility journey, every other woman gets pregnant and you think it's just you. And I'm like, that story is so interesting to me. And maybe it's because we don't talk enough to other women. And hopefully that's changing over the years. There is more open conversation to hopefully feel like you're not the only one. But I can imagine there is, which I'm also happy to hear. But when you were going through that situation, there was no actually alternative in the US, which is wild. So you are in that situation. You found the flow for your first daughter. You said, you were breastfeeding, doing formula, or having that existing formula. At what point were you like, actually, let me even create our own formula, or knew there was a gap here in the market for this European brand, which we even know so many mothers who are buying it overseas and feeding their children. So when did that happen?
Well, I mean, that was actually one of the signs, right? Everywhere I turned and I started asking people about formula, I mean, there was a few things. I noticed that a lot of people were using the black market and they were shipping in boxes of powdered milk from abroad to feed their baby. So then you have to pause and you have to go, hold on a second. We're an agricultural country. Why is it that we feel we need to ship in formula from abroad to feed our baby? That starts to raise a question. The next one was, being European myself, I was looking at my sister and my cousins and everyone else who were feeding their baby, and they didn't have the same level of guilt and judgment. And in many ways, and I must say this, it's because society also has a different viewpoint on it. And all the way down to allowing mothers to have things like long paid federal leave. In this country, we are telling mothers that you are expected to breastfeed for a certain period of time. Oh, and by the way, you're also expected to get back to work immediately. So we've set up society to almost have an immediate conflict with the idea of feeding your baby. So the short of it is, between society and stigma, the product itself, the black market, it became very evident that there was an opportunity to put a better formula into the US market.
And, creating a formula is not like you're creating a product in your kitchen that you're testing. Like, there was only, I think, yeah. So where do you even start? So I know, whether it's your co-founder, maybe how much money you put in for that pilot, like what did those early days look like? Because you are disrupting a massive industry where I think I was listening to another interview. You said like there has not been any other brand that has come out in, I don't know, a very long period of time. There's only like 4 brands or something back
That's
then.
right. Yeah, we were the first in a long time, in decades. And it's so funny. I actually get this question a lot, especially for some young founders that are breaking in. Like, really, the how? Like, what were the exact how you did it? So, obviously, it's not lost on me. I'm not a scientist. I came from a world of operations and marketing and companies that were disrupting industries. That came with its own perks, but not one to come in and radically change a formulation. So my first step was to hire some scientists, food scientists, neonatal scientists, to be able to take the formulation and the vision and to be able to reformulate it for what we wanted. Now, that also came with a lot of guardrails. You had to meet the FDA requirements. You had to make sure that the nutrients fell within certain ranges. You had to make sure that the supply chain that supported that was also regarded as safe for infants. But I say all of this like it's a checklist. The journey to understand those bullet points, it's not like there's like a book you can just go buy or a yellow pages of infant formula manufacturers. I was putting the PhD together on understanding what it took. So the research journey was a massive piece of it. I mean, the first search I did was for a baby formula expert. And I landed on a website that said babyformulaexpert.com. And I called the woman on the website, and she became my first contractor to help reformulate the product. So honestly, the gist I can summarize this as is it really is one step at a time. And after a few months, you find yourself with a new formulation, brand identity, and a path to being able to get it commercialized. And at the time, there's days that go by and you think this is never going to get done, but it's just one foot in front of the other.
Yes. And I want to go back a little bit. Just 2 questions that I had that I forgot to ask, but when did you officially leave Airbnb? And then I want to talk about how you were pregnant.
Yes.
So tell the listeners that I was mind blown. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, okay. So back up for a second. This is really interesting. Here I am with my first kid, and I'm going through all of the emotions, the identity crisis of having a baby, my feeding journey, and I'm studying everything about infant formula. And then I go back to Airbnb after maternity leave, and I still can't stop thinking about it. So fast forward to Christmas of 2017, and I am in a pub in Cork in Ireland with a load of my Irish girlfriends that I grew up with. And it was New Year's Eve. And, after a drink or two, I was like, girls, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to go start myself an infant formula company. And I knew I wanted to do this. I knew that it was in my future.
Mm.
We all ordered a round of drinks. We cheers. It was all very exciting. I come back to the States, back into life, and fast forward a few weeks later, I peed on a stick, found out I was pregnant with my second kid, and I was in January. I turned to my husband. I said, I'm going to leave to start an infant formula company. And I always say it was my daughter who inspired it. And then it was number 2 who actually was the motivation to go do something about it.
Oh my God. And it's so interesting because I mean, I've been doing this podcast for 5 years. I say it all the time, but whenever someone gets pregnant or has a kid, there has been so many amazing companies that have been built in that time. And that is one thing that just surprises me. But I would imagine that you are living again, you're like, I'm going to go through this journey with my second daughter, you're feeding your first daughter, like the fuel was there and you had a constant reminder of like, all right, I want to do something. And what's so fascinating is in that 9 months of your pregnancy, like that sense of urgency to get shit done is
Yes.
magic. Like I haven't been in that, but I was like, I want to launch a new product when I'm pregnant. Cause like you were just saying, you had a timeline and the urgency to get off the ground. And I think in starting any business, you can spend a very long time in ideation, thinking how to do this and that. And it's like, you just go. Like having that, being pregnant actually is a wonderful thing. Like,
oh my God, I love that you're saying this. My first business plan that I kind of wrote up for this, I had it broken out into different trimesters. And I broke it down because I was like, at the end of the first trimester, I'm going to have these 6 things done. By the end of the second trimester, I have these like 10 things done. And you are totally right. In my mind, I was on a mission to make sure that there was a better product on the market so that I could feed it to this baby that was cooking inside me. I just didn't know how much time and capital it would actually take. So it did take a little bit longer, but it was a huge motivation.
Yeah. And when did you realize? Because I know you guys had a pilot, and I think that's important to talk about because people always ask, like, well, how did you get the first product out? It's like such an evolution. So maybe you can share, like, when did the pilot come out? And there was a huge turning point there, too. So, yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
I mean, yeah, God, all of this feels like years ago. I mean, it was years ago at this point. Um, had a pilot from a moment where we were just launching in San Francisco to a handful of people. And in large part, the pilot was based on making our product in Europe. We weren't making it in the US, mostly because there was very few manufacturers here in the US. Actually, only one contract manufacturer in the US. I know. I mean, that's another entire conversation around how do you strengthen the domestic industry to support innovation? Because when you have a company like myself trying to innovate in a space that isn't set up for it, you're never going to see change. The short of it is, I took too much of a disruptive approach, and that disruptive approach basically had the FDA come in and say, sorry, we're not a huge fan of how you're doing this, and shut me down. And shut me down essentially, I think it was like 2 to 3 weeks after launching a pilot. I don't think I made more than $4,000. And that was I actually think the biggest learning in that moment was that even though you want to disrupt a certain industry, you also need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, is the industry ready to be disrupted? And when you go to do it, how are you doing it in a way that maybe you can be compliant in doing it, not defiant? How are you doing it so that you're bringing other people along and not going up against what has been a long-standing way of doing something? You can disrupt something, but it still requires tact and approach to be able to do it right. Um, and yeah, I was entering someone else's industry, not the other way around. And so that pilot was a big learning, and that learning took another 2 years to reformulate, build a new supply chain, build a strong relationship with the FDA, and then launch again at the top of 21.
You know, it's so interesting because you would think at that point, and did you guys raise money yet when
Oh,
that
yeah.
Okay, so you raised money, you launched, you brought this in, you get shut down by the FDA. Like that is an investor, a founder's like worst nightmare. And a lot of businesses could go out then, right? So I also know the way you showed up during the recall was actually a really big pivotal moment in the way the business kind of continued and stayed alive. So what was that? Because I know you got a few calls afterwards that were like, Laura, like you guys did a great job. So how did you survive this recall? And what were some of those calls you got?
I believe how you exit something and how you handle something is better than how you enter it. It can leave a bigger impression than how you entered. And that's exactly what happened here. How we addressed the FDA, put out a public letter, managed with grace and vulnerability and ownership. I received an email from the only contract manufacturer who made infant formula, who also declined to make the formula multiple times leading up to that. And they said, we loved how you handled the FDA, and now we would love to make your product. I'm synthesizing the gist of it, but it was essentially applauding the reaction and management of it. And for an industry like infant formula, you are going to be met with one challenge after another after another. We're not making a granola bar. We are feeding the most vulnerable audience one of the highest quality and safety products on the market. This is a consumable. There is zero room to get this wrong. Zero. And I do think how you pick up and manage anything that doesn't go right is just an indicator on your ability to be able to do the next thing better. So, yeah, the return was great. what do they like what do they call it? The hero's journey? Well,
Heroes.
we call it our heroine journey. So it has definitely been a heroine journey, and that was just the beginning.
Yeah. And like you said, there's so many challenges and like particularly what you were building. Like any business has their challenges. It's, there's good days, there's bad days, but you are in a very unique situation. And, I'm just curious, this might be a very simple question, but like in those moments, did you ever feel defeated? Like you said, there was another 2 years after that. Like your journey has been a long road to get this out. And, were there a lot of days of you crying? Like, how did you keep that stamina? Because so much of also business is staying in the game and going with the waves, right? So how have you been doing that?
Lots of tears, lots of tears, lots of questioning. I said this at the beginning. I think a lot of what was able to keep me going was an ability to continue to bet on myself and knowing that I had full control over the next steps in front of me, that I knew how to handle some of the unknowns. I've had them in my past. I can navigate them again. It doesn't mean that challenges are not going to come. I just had confidence in mine and the team's ability to be able to navigate them. And we have a joke now, even at Bobbie. What time is it? This is so funny. Today's a Friday. Yeah, we always have a joke that is every Friday comes with a surprise. So, at around 3 to 4 p.m., for whatever reason at Bobbie, we always have something come in that's so big that it changes the direction for like the next week and takes over the weekend. But you don't disrupt something and have your plans just work out. Like that's not disruption. Like, I believe that your work is dictated by the world. What happens in the world will dictate your job. And that's exactly how we've operated from that moment.
I love that. And you're right. I feel like if you're disrupting anything, there's just going to be problems. And that's part of it. Like if you don't have problems and you're not running a business, like that means you're not growing. That means you're not taking bigger bets. So I
No.
remind myself that every time. And if it was easy, everyone would do it. So whenever I'm stuck there and I'm like, this is tough. And it's like, Yaz, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So, it's, I love it. And I think for you too, what I love is just like the passion, like there was that passion is giving you that magic to like
Yes.
persevere. And I think having that is so crucial in any business. Like hearing your story, going through it, it's just a good reminder. Like if you're going to start something, like be sure as hell passionate about it because that is what's going to push you through.
To underscore what you just said, that is fundamental to be able to keep going. When you really believe in your product and you truly believe in the impact and what's better for the world, what's better for the market, what's better for babies, then you will wake up every day and you will take any challenge that comes your way. But if you don't believe in that, if you don't believe in yourself, it becomes way harder to wake up and do that.
It's so true. And, I'm sure you can talk so much about this, but you did, many fundraising journeys, pregnant multiple times throughout it. What were maybe some of the maybe lessons or I don't want to say highlights, like the most surprising thing from your journey fundraising as a pregnant woman for your business?
Okay, why am I pausing? Because I have a million stories. But
I
there's
know
one,
it's a hard one. It's a lot.
but there is one particular thing that I don't know if I've ever been able to put into words perfectly. I went into fundraising with a good resume. I had Google behind me, I had Airbnb, I had basically built my career in Silicon Valley. In many ways, I expected that coming in and raising money, I had the backing, I had the receipts to show, of course, I should be able to get the backing here. But what I hadn't fully expected was that I was also walking in and trying to raise money 8 months pregnant and for a product that in many ways was stigmatized or maybe not fully understood by the average investor that I was pitching to. So instead of that investor looking at me as an entrepreneur who saw a big opportunity, I think most of them looked at me as a mom with a passion project who had her own baby that she really wished she could feed. And hence why in my first fundraise, I spoke to over 65 investors. And Now I look back and I think at the time I was disheartened by the constant no's or the constant questioning. You wake up and you're receiving another like 3 emails telling you all of the reasons they don't want to invest. And you're going, I'll read this, I'll consume, and then I need to put on my shoes and walk into 2 other pitches to try and convince them that it makes sense. So you're consuming all of the negative no's and the critiques while you're also trying to go in and continue to stay positive that this is worth backing. Now, as I look back, I think the only way that I can describe it is it's just fuel. It's good fuel because every single one of those no's has you walk away going, oh, I am so excited to prove you wrong. I am so excited to prove that I am not speaking as the loud minority. It's actually the silent majority of other mothers and parents who I know need this product. And that kept me going.
Oh my goodness. And did you ever have investors like email you and say, Laura, we missed out? Because obviously so successful now, has so many successful fundraise. Like I'm sure people are like, man, I wish I got in early with you.
I got tagged into a social post recently from an investor I spoke to very early on who said, this is the company that got away. And it did. It put a little smile on my face.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, another question that I had also was maybe on the education piece, right? Like obviously there are mothers out there who you said, we're buying overseas, bringing it, who knew the quality of the European formula and why the US didn't have, good formulations, like you said, corn syrup and everything. Was it tough to kind of educate the benefits around this new product that you give to your child, and like in such a mature industry with only a few players? Like, how was that experience when you launched?
Um, I think there was such a desire to see something new that maybe early on that was a huge play in it. But use the word education, and I do think we don't even see ourselves as marketing our product. In many ways, we see what we do as education. And it's in support of that mother who used to be me, who wasn't thinking about infant formula yesterday because there was no reason to, who is questioning the old message or voice for what infant formula used to be and now wondering what the new side of it is. We see ourselves as educators and putting out research that helps a mother feel like they've made the best choice. I mean, so to answer your question, I think because we see ourselves in that role, I don't know if it has been too challenging. It's just baked into the way we market.
Yeah, I love the education, and people are wanting to hear this. Like the market was ready for a different approach, and it makes so much sense to probably so many mothers. So,
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I love that. And, I know we're kind of coming up on time, and I'm curious kind of your own journey as CEO. You mentioned like watching Brian at Airbnb and how he had, went through so much evolution year over year. How have you kind of changed, whether it's as a person, a leader, a mom? I mean, you guys have been doing this since you launched, right? Officially 2021, or was that the pilot?
Officially in 2021.
Yes.
So now
So
we just entered our 5th year. Yeah. And it's been a harrowing journey to say the least. How have I grown as a CEO? Or the approach that I take is it's one of curiosity, and curiosity and courage, I think, are 2 big things I keep coming back to. It's helpful that it's just January. I spent a lot of time towards the end of the year really considering how to approach, what's ahead and how I wanna show up as a leader. And these were 2 big words that I think are, courage, just to, like, underscore this for a second, and I think it is something from a lot of leaders that I admire. I watch their courage in the face of adversity. I watch them with courage through times of just doubt and people pushing back, negative, hate. I watch them take courageous moves and risks in their business. And one thing I never want to lose is as the business continues to grow and maybe the weight of the company continues to grow, that I never lose that courage for taking big leaps. And always remembering those big leaps are not just for kind of the company or our shareholders and investors. Those big leaps are for the hundreds and thousands of babies that we're feeding. They're for the breast cancer survivors that we're sponsoring. They're for the LA impacted parents who've been displaced, who need formula to support them through their journey, and just continuing to have the courage to take big leaps.
How do you stay energized, sane, and excited through your life? Because you do have many kids, you know, you're a wife, you're running a business. Like, what does that look like for you in your life?
You know, I feel like I have all of these really beautiful communities around me that in many ways are all very different and they feed my soul in different ways. Um, my girlfriends that I grew up with or that were part of my past life, that I get to be me and I don't get to be the founder. I don't have to be the mother. I get to, in many ways, continue and remember and stay grounded to who I was. And then I've built a very powerful and beautiful group of women that I can relate to through these tough challenges, who are also building companies, who have fallen to the ground, whose businesses have gone under, but then they've risen again. And those phone calls also really help me through moments where I think, who do I turn to in this time? Who do I get advice from? And then yes, then there's my kids. And if there's anything that I need at the end of a week is just undivided hours and attention with those kids, just to remind me what I'm doing every day.
And you have four
I have
little
four.
ones. Wow. Okay,
Four.
I can't tell you how many times I get my listeners being like, can you ask them more? Like, I don't like to ask, like, how do you balance everything, you know, but it's more so maybe people are curious about how are you managing? I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, 4 kids, whatever you do, that's like a handful, right? And you obviously, Bobbie's your other baby. You have 5 kids you're running. Maybe how do you manage that life? Like the support you have, like the architecture of your life for anyone listening.
Architecture, the infrastructure, yeah, the support system around me, it's really, really important. So I would say, I'm an operator through and through. And it was very clear to me. I mean, you can't you can't do anything in life without creating the system to support you to do that thing. And I see time as my most important currency to be able to do what I'm doing with Bobbie and also get that time with my family. So I build an infrastructure, which includes systems to allow us to be more efficient, um, a kind of a team and family members around us to support with schedules and to get us through the week, even family meetings with my husband, where we take it very seriously. Who's taking on what tasks and what does it look like? So it's all about the system and infrastructure. But then let me be very candid. Like, my hair is greasy right now. I have made a lot of trade-offs in the last few weeks. I haven't gotten to a nail salon in a long time. I really could do with a proper workout, and I'm just being really vulnerable here. There's certain things that you trade off that you just wish you could do it all. But I think women can do anything. You just probably can't do everything.
Just at the same time.
That is okay. So I don't want anybody listening to this, man, she's really got her shit together running this company with 4 kids. My nails don't look good. They don't look good, ladies.
No, you look great either way. The slick back hair looks amazing. I can't even
Thank
tell if it's
you.
oil. No. But I love asking that question too, because I have noticed some women, they'll have their first kid, whether they have their own company or, are working. They're like, I don't get how these women on your podcast do it all. I'm like, guys, they have infrastructure. Like the way you run your kids is how you run a
How
business.
you run the business.
Literally. And it was funny. Once I went to dinner with 2 friends of ours who my husband and I admire. They have a business, they have kids, and they work together, and me and my husband have our own businesses, and we're like, yeah, we don't work together like that. But they're like, once you have kids, that will be your business, where both of you guys are gonna, you treat it like a business. Like if you want to, I know everyone kind of approaches it differently, but to be the operator of your company, still have children, be involved, like you need certain systems and constant communication with your husband. And this is me just asking my friends and people like you. So it's helpful to hear, because some women think, how are they doing it? And it's like, there's so much that happens. They actually have help. Like they have help.
You have to have help.
You have
to have help. And yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It doesn't just happen. You have to design the world you want, and you have to design the systems that support you to have that world. And it doesn't come easy, and it's a lot of freaking trade-offs. And I use the word trade-offs a lot. You got to decide on what those priorities are, design systems around to support it, and then you have to be okay with those trade-offs. Do I wish I could go to every freaking play or kids museum day or whatever they have? Absolutely. And yet, even with my husband, we have to trade off and decide who goes when and what does that look like. So yeah, I do think the message of maybe doing it all or the concept of thinking it all comes easy, we need to change that narrative.
Yeah. And also as a CEO, this is not even with kids. Like what you said even applies to how you run a company, like having systems, having priorities and being clear and on top of that. Cause you can easily get sidelined to so many other things. So even what you said on building like a purposeful life for yourself, even outside of your business, like exactly what you said is magic. So I think about that all the time and we don't even have kids yet. So I love the way your brain thinks. So appreciate you sharing all of that. Amazing. And maybe one last question we'll end with, and we've talked a lot about this throughout the interview, but what do you think maybe most people get wrong when it comes to entrepreneurship or starting a business?
What do they get wrong? I think that there is this belief that it all just sort of happens. And one of my biggest pet peeves is hearing how many people are like, "Oh, that made a lot of sense that you got into that. Like you were very lucky to choose this industry." Or, a lot of the belief that it's really just like choosing the right industry or choosing the right product. And yeah, that definitely plays into it. But I think what a lot of people get wrong is it there's a level of rigor and precision and strategy and then discipline, really good discipline. And without discipline to taking those steps, and I don't mean that your plans aren't going to change and that you can't be flexible. Of course you do. But you got to execute. And that discipline is so critical to get right. So, I do think there's a lot of people who get that, but I do hear a lot of like, "Oh, you were so lucky." And sometimes I'm not sure if it fully is understood the level of discipline and rigor and focus that has to go into getting it done.
I think that person that's saying that they're not in the arena. They don't get it. Like, I don't know that that's my pet peeve too. I'm like, you are not in the weeds of,
Oh,
your business that like, I could only imagine the discipline and having the discipline year over year, day over day, like for a long period of time. So I could imagine the pet peeve, but oh my gosh, Laura, I feel like I could have talked to you for hours. This was so fun, so inspired by you as a person, everything you've built. And it was such a joy having you on the podcast today. Thank you.
oh, thank you. Such great questions.